Hey, welcome back to the stash. There's something weirdly haunting about Spider-Man Noir, and I mean sure, it's a much darker Spider-Man comic compared to the rest. Peter Parker carries a gun in some scenes, New York feels filthy and hopeless, and it's not even because Norman Osborn is less of a businessman here and more of a monster hiding behind political power, it's the feeling of the actual comic. The feeling that this version of Spider-Man was born in a world that genuinely did not care whether people survived or not. Spider-Man Noir could have so easily just been another edgy alternate universe from the late 2000s. How could you imagine if Garth Ennis wrote this comic? Through it all though, this book actually understands Spider-Man. It understands Peter Parker's core even if it's set in the Great Depression. That's the part I don't think enough people talk about. Nowadays when most people think of Spider-Man Noir, they probably think of the Spider-Verse movies, the exaggerated old-timey slang, the Rubik's Cube joke, and of course, Nicolas Cage going batshit crazy. Now while I still like that version too, the original comic is just so much better in my opinion. This Peter Parker isn't the wisecracking high school kid swinging through a colorful New York skyline. He's angry. He's angry because he sees suffering everywhere he looks. He sees corruption protected by money. Rich people treating humans like garbage. He sees politicians lying while ordinary people starve in the streets. And the terrifying thing about this comic is that nobody swoops in to save the day. There's no Avengers, no Shield, no bright superhero waiting around the corner. I mean, sure, they had their titles, but Spider-Man Noir still felt condensed within its limits. I prefer it that way, to be honest. There's just New York City during the Great Depression, from the cold streets to the corrupt cops, and of course to the gangsters. This series feels grimy in a way most Spider-Man comics never do. Even the artwork feels dirty. Every page looks like cigarette smoke has seeped into it, like the city itself is exhausted. And somehow through all of that, Peter Parker still tries to maintain his humanity and morality within a world that gives him no reason to do so. That's the core of why this comic works, because underneath the noir aesthetic and the violence and the pulp crime atmosphere, there is this story. A story about Peter Parker refusing to let the world destroy his sense of right and wrong, even when it pushes him to his very limits. It's a huge part as to what makes this one of the most interesting Spider-Man reinterpretations Marvel has ever made. But hey, real quick, here at The Stash, we're swinging for 27,000 subscribers. And you know what they say, with great power comes great responsibility. So if you're into Spider-Man or comic book deep dives, feel free to hit subscribe. Also, I want to say thank you to channel member Dragon Kingery for not only requesting this video, but for the constant support shown on the channel. And if you're watching on a phone or on a tablet, be sure to hit the hype button down below, it helps the channel out big time. But with that all said, let's get right back into the video. The thing I love most about Spider-Man Noir is how immediately it commits to the world. It generally feels like another universe entirely. How the second you start reading it, New York already feels broken, people are starving, homeless camps are everywhere, crime bosses practically run the city, even the people who are supposed to protect others are compromised in some way. And at the center of it all is Peter Parker, a version of Peter that feels much more tired and desperate. He's younger, angrier, rougher around the edges. We can tell he grew up surrounded by fear and violence. One of the smartest choices this comic makes is turning Aunt May into a political activist. How we got glimpses of this side of May even during the Bronze Age, but this series decides to make it a key character trait. That changes the entire emotional foundation of Peter Parker, because Peter grows up seeing systemic injustice every day. He watches hungry people line up for food, powerful men intimidate vulnerable people, and corruption operate openly because nobody can stop it. The atmosphere alone shapes this version of Spider-Man more than the spider bite itself, and to be honest, that's what makes him feel so compelling. This Peter isn't motivated by abstract heroism, he's motivated by his rage. The kind of somebody who looks around the world and realizes it's unfair beyond comprehension. The comic keeps returning to this idea that Peter cannot emotionally accept the cruelty surrounding him by even having characters like Ben Urich trying to break that spirit. But the dynamic between Peter and Ben is honestly one of the most interesting parts of the series, because Ben isn't portrayed as some perfect moral journalist here, as they instead show that he's been corrupted by years of surviving in this version of New York City. He knows how dirty it all is, how power works, that people disappear if they push too hard, and Peter almost frustrates him because he still believes that things can change. There's a tragic aspect of their relationship, especially because Ben clearly sees pieces of himself in Peter. except he simply wants Peter to stop caring before the city destroys him too. But Peter just can't do it. That's why the scene where Peter keeps getting angrier and angrier while taking photos of suffering across New York works so well. You see, a lesser comic would have treated those scenes like edgy atmosphere, whereas Hein and Sapolsky uses them to define Peter Parker, with every injustice pushing him further towards becoming Spider-Man. And the horror elements help amplify all of that, because this comic is genuinely unsettling at times. The Goblin in this universe feels terrifying, almost like he's a master predator. It helps a lot too, since the comic constantly surrounds him with shadows, masks, smoke, hidden rooms, and brutal violence. Even the way people talk about him makes him feel larger than life. And I love that this series leans into old pulp noir storytelling without losing Spider-Man's identity. It's got it all, man. Like, you know, it's got the speakeasies, the smoky back rooms, the trench coats, and of course the corruption buried inside every institution. All of this though works better than Imagine, because Noir Peter Parker feels so vulnerable. Even after he gains his powers, he still feels outmatched by the city itself. But speaking of the origin, this might be one of my favorite alternate Spider-Man origins ever. It's creepy, almost supernatural. Peter getting bitten by a strange spider hidden among ancient artifacts already feels unsettling enough, but then the comic pushes it further with the vision of the giant spider creature speaking to him. It all just feels like a dream in the best way possible. But visually, this comic absolutely shines as well. The series easily nails that Great Depression / noir atmosphere. The shadows are incredible, the colors are brilliantly muted, everything feels oppressive. I could go on and on. Hell, even Peter's costume is genius in how simple and effective it is. And I love that he uses Uncle Ben's old pilot outfit. It feels assembled out of grief and desperation. And honestly, that's kind of the whole series. What really makes Spider-Man Noir special though is how differently it understands Peter Parker, because this comic strips away almost everything traditionally associated with Spider-Man and somehow still almost completely gets the character. And I think the reason it works is because the comic understands that Spider-Man was always political underneath the surface. Political in the sense that Spidey has always been about ordinary people struggling to survive. It's just that Spider-Man Noir pushes those ideas to their absolute limit. This version of New York practically crushes people spiritually. You can feel it in every conversation. Even Ben Urich represents that collapse. His character honestly becomes one of the saddest parts of the series for me, because Ben used to clearly care. You can tell there was once a version of him that wanted to expose corruption honestly and help people, but survival turned him into somebody compromised. Addiction, fear, the Goblin, it all consumed him. That's the scary thing about the comic. Corruption spreads everywhere with nobody escaping untouched. That's the kind of storytelling this comic excels at. It treats violence like how it is, something ugly. And because of that, Peter's morality throughout the series becomes way more interesting, because unlike normal Peter Parker, this version actually does cross the line. He kills the Vulture. It's not a triumph either, the comic makes that very clear. There's a clear desire of revenge within the scene, but also the added element of protecting his Aunt May from the same gory fate his uncle suffered. That murder hangs over the entire story. You can feel Peter carrying it around constantly. It's pretty unique too. It's not every day Spider-Man gets proper revenge, let alone actually kills someone. It's what makes the final confrontation with Norman Osborn so interesting, because by that point, Peter absolutely has reasons to kill him too. He wants to finish the job as well. This version of Osborn destroyed lives, corrupted everyone around him, and not to mention played a direct role in the death of Uncle Ben. And after everything Peter's already done, the comic genuinely makes you wonder if he's actually going to go through with it, but he doesn't. That's the important part, because even after all the darkness surrounding him, Peter still ultimately wants justice instead of pure vengeance. It's what makes this comic feel smarter than people give it credit for. It understands that this version of Spider-Man is darker. He is more rougher, more violent, more consumed by anger, but the story still refuses to completely strip away Peter Parker's humanity. It's the kind of tension which makes Spider-Man Noir so compelling. He feels like a version of Spider-Man constantly at war with himself. A kid trying to hold on to morality in a city where morality almost feels impossible. That's why Aunt May matters so much here too. She represents the part of Peter that still believes people deserve compassion. Even while surrounded by corruption and violence, May keeps helping people. And Peter inherits that from her as much as he inherits the anger. That's really what Spider-Man Noir is exploring underneath all the shadows and violence. What happens when you take Peter Parker and place him in one of the bleakest worlds imaginable? Does he still become Spider-Man? Well, the answer is yes, just in a much more harsh, much more emotionally damaged kind of way. He's capable of the things classic Peter Parker would never do, but he's still somebody trying to protect people in a world that stopped caring a long time ago. That's why this comic sticks with me. It doesn't try to reinvent Spider-Man by rejecting who Peter Parker is, as it instead reinvents him by pushing every part of him to the absolute edge. And even within the artwork, the series completely commits to that vision as well. You can practically feel the coldness coming off the pages. But to be honest, I just really miss comics with this kind of identity. Not because everything needs to be dark, but because this series knew exactly what it wanted to be, and it used the noir setting brilliantly to pull different aspects of Peter Parker into focus. That's why Noir Peter stands out compared to so many different alternate universes of Spider-Man, because underneath everything, he still feels like Peter Parker, while being extremely unique at the same time. I think that's why Spider-Man Noir deserves so much more attention than it actually gets, because even though the character himself has become massively popular thanks to the Spider-Verse films and the new live-action show coming out, it feels like the original comic keeps getting left behind, which is such a shame, because this series genuinely reinvented Peter Parker in one of the most fascinating ways Marvel has ever attempted. All of this is done by simply asking what would Peter be like in a world consumed by fear, corruption, poverty, and violence, and somehow, even in that world, he still becomes the Amazing Spider-Man.